In the 1800s, Apache people had been living in parts of today's Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and northern Mexico. In the beginning of the 19th century, the Apaches and the Spaniards were at peace, but it wasn't always like that. But since their encounter in 1541, they had a complicated history, sometimes waging war with each other, and sometimes coexisting in peace. In 1821, Mexico gained independence from Spain. 10 years later, in 1831, war broke out once again. In the decades that followed, an Apache leader and medicine man would lead his people into war and resistance against the settlers. His name was Geronimo. Geronimo was born in what is today Arizona, in the Nodoyon Canyon, near the present-day town of Clifton, Arizona, on June 16, 1829. His birth name was Goyakla, or one who yawns. The name Geronimo was later given to him by the Mexicans. He was part of the Badoncalle subsection, a small but mighty group. They were part of the Chiricahua tribe of Apaches. Geronimo had 3 brothers and 4 sisters. As a young boy, he learned to farm crops of corn, beans, squash, and peppers in the fertile, well-watered country. But early on, his fellow Badonkages recognized that he had a gift for seeing into the future in order to interpret the present, and he was trained as a shaman, learning holy songs and prayers. By his coming of age, he showed early promise as a hunter, and in 1846, when he was 17, he was admitted to the Council of Warriors, which also allowed him to marry. At the time, the Apaches were at war with the Mexicans to the south, the U.S. to the north, and the neighboring Comanche and Navajo tribes. Geronimo led 4 successful raids on the nearby tribes that year. Around the same time, he fell in love with the 1850s. The band traveled into Old Mexico, where they could trade because a peace treaty had been established. Camping outside a Mexican town they called Casquila in Chihuahua, they stayed for several days, leaving a few warriors to guard the camp. The rest of the men went into town to trade. When they were returning from town, they were met by several women and children who told them that Mexican troops had attacked their camp. They returned to camp and found their guard warriors killed and their horses, supplies, and arms gone. Even worse, many of the women and children had been killed as well. Among those that lay dead were Geronimo's wife, mother, and 3 children. As a result, he hated all Mexicans for the rest of his life. The Mexican Colonel Carrasco claimed this was a revenge attack for an Apache raid conducted earlier. Filled with grief, Geronimo burned his family's belongings, according to Apache tradition, before heading into the forest, where he claimed he heard a voice that told him, "No gun will ever kill you. I will take the bullets from the guns, and I will guide your arrows." Backed by the sudden knowledge of power, he put on his war paint and traveled out to the other Apache tribes in the region to recruit support for his personal vendetta against Mexico. The women and children were relocated and hidden deep in a vast cave network in the Arizona wilderness to protect them from any vengeful Mexican soldiers, and the United Apaches went on the warpath. This included Geronimo's Badoncalle Apaches, led by Chief Mangas Calderadas, the Chaconan Apaches by Chief Cochise, and the Nedni Apaches by Chief Judge. Traveling on foot, the revenge-hungry Apaches covered over 45 miles a day, stopping only to sleep and hunt, and crossing the border from Apache territory into Mexico. When they reached the outskirts of the settlement of Arispe, the Mexican garrison sent 8 soldiers out under a white flag to negotiate a truce with the Apache. These men were killed and scalped on the spot. The next morning, 8 companies of Mexican infantry marched to fight the Apaches. When Geronimo saw that some of these soldiers were from the same company that participated in the massacre at Casquier, he got even more angry. Geronimo, being the one who had suffered the greatest loss in the massacre, was chosen to lead the Apache into battle. With Geronimo leading, the Apaches charged at an entire company of riflemen, ignoring the bullets flying all around his head and charging Mexican ranks, armed only with a hunting knife. He began slashing his enemy. They screamed and prayed to St. Jerome to save them from this bloodthirsty nation. He later took the death cries of his enemies, Geronimo, as his new name. At the end of the battle, every enemy soldier had been slain. Geronimo stood alone on the battlefield, knee-deep in the dead, holding a dull knife, the shaft of a spear he had broken off in the body of another soldier, and a crimson-stained saber he had pried from the hands of an enemy. The Apache warriors, who saw how furiously he battled in his quest for vengeance, asked him to be the war leader of their people. His first order was to scalp the dead. The legend of Geronimo was born.